Good morning, everyone. I'm getting the hold, so we'll just go ahead and kind of talk a little bit. I think we're good to go now. So if you would turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Mark, chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. Mark 12, 13. We're picking up in the narrative again. As we previously noted, in the past couple of weeks, there's an overarching theme of hostility against Jesus driving the narrative at this point. We saw it begin a few weeks back in response to Jesus' actions in the temple. The religious leaders at that time asked Jesus, and I quote in Mark 11:28, "By what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you the authority to do these things?" And we unpacked that question, and as we did, we saw the malicious nature of it, and we saw that it wasn't really a question designed to gain understanding from Jesus. Rather, it was designed to put Jesus on trial and trap him in his words. And with that in mind, in our text this morning, the posture of the religious leaders continues to be that way. They ask him another question in our text this morning, but it is not out of a desire to learn anything from him. They ask a question designed to trap him in his words, the same way as before. And we're going to go ahead and look at that now, and then we'll break it down. So follow along with me. There's only 4 verses here. In verse 13 it says, "They sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to him in order to trap him in a statement. They came and said to him, 'Teacher, we know that you are truthful and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?' But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, 'Why are you testing me? Bring me a denarius to look at.' They brought one, and he said to them, 'Whose likeness and inscription is this?' And they said to him, 'Caesar's.' And Jesus said to them, 'Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' And they were amazed at him." Note that Mark states the religious leaders' intention behind their question outright. If you notice in verse 13, it says they asked this question with the intent to trap him. But this time, as we're going to see, they stepped up their game a bit. On this second attempt, they pulled all the stops, and we see that primarily in verse 14. First, they attempted to butter him up with some flattery, which emphasized his willingness to speak the truth no matter the cost. And I'll put it up on the board so you can see it here. They came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and defer to no one." "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth." In other words, they're basically buttering him up, saying to him, "You tell it how it is. You're not afraid to speak the truth. We know that you call things how they are." And they attempted to use that flattery to force him into a position on a controversial issue. And then they dropped that bombshell at the latter portion of verse 14. "Is it lawful to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?" In other words, they were saying to him, "Since you're so bold and courageous, since you are so willing to tell the truth how it is, what say you on this question here regarding the poll tax to Caesar?" Now, Mark tells us that Jesus recognized their trap right away. It says in verse 15, "But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, 'Why are you testing me?'" And we also see that Jesus' answer to their question was so profound that it not only evaded their trap, but left everyone who heard it amazed. In other words, they'd never heard a response like this before. And with this in mind, we're going to devote this morning's study to better understanding what happened here. We're going to unpack what happened here first by looking carefully at the religious leaders' question, next by looking at Jesus' answer, and finally we're going to talk a little bit about the implications for us today regarding his answer. So there's going to be the question, the answer, and the implications, and we're going to dig in right now. The outlines are on the bistro tables. I forgot to mention, if you don't have an outline, you want one to follow along, go ahead and grab one. But first we have the question. And the religious leaders' question was seen in verse 14. I put it up on the board, but we'll look at it again. And it was this: "Is it lawful to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?" Now, contrary to what we might initially think, this question was not about the paying of taxes in general. It was not about the paying of taxes in general. The Jewish population had long been accustomed to paying taxes on property and customs on articles. And now, we're not saying that they liked paying these taxes. They didn't like them at all, but they accepted it and they were accustomed to it. So it wasn't something that they were completely unused to doing. The tax referred to in this text was something separate and distinct from all the other taxes that they paid. And it was on something that was relatively new to them. By the time of this writing, it was about 25 years old, but it was still something relatively new and still controversial. It was basically a head tax that was levied upon everyone who lived in the area between the ages of about 14 to age 65. And it was basically a tax for the privilege of living under Roman rule. You're under our authority, you live here, and so we're going to tax everyone between this age just for being a citizen under this area. The New American Standard clarifies this distinction with the term poll tax. If you don't have an NASB, it may say, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or tribute to Caesar? NASB actually identifies it as poll tax here to help make that distinction for us. It wasn't a question about normal taxes, it was a question of the poll tax. And this tax came to be around 6 AD when Archelaus, who was the son of Herod, failed to capably govern the region. And I don't know if we talked about this, I think in the summer when we talked about Herod and we broke down all the sons of Herod, right? You guys probably remember that. Archelaus is one of those sons. Well, he took over when his father died, and he failed. Many of his brothers took to different areas and they did just fine, but Archelaus failed miserably. And Rome was forced to step in and make Judea, Jerusalem and that surrounding area, a Roman province, governed by Rome directly. And at the time of this text, Pontius Pilate was the Roman appointed governor, and we will see more on him soon. But just so you know, he is the 5th prefect that Rome had appointed by this time. But it first happened in AD 6, and with the first Roman governor installed, a census was taken, and a poll tax was levied based upon the results of that census. And this is the tax that the religious leaders are talking about when they're saying, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, comparatively speaking, this poll tax was not particularly burdensome. It was about a denarius a year. That is to say, it was about a day's wage per person per year. And to put it another way, it was a very small fraction of what they paid in property taxes and land taxes and such things as that. Nonetheless, despite how small it was in respect to everything else, it sparked a huge outrage in its inception. It eventually resulted in an armed revolt led by a man by the name of Judas of Galilee, which the Roman government had to put down. And for those of you who are interested and you want to jot down Acts chapter 5, verse 37, there is a place in Acts 5 where the apostles were really getting in trouble with the religious leaders, and the religious leaders wanted to kill them. And there was a man named Gamaliel who stood up and calmed them all down and says, hey, let's think about this for a minute. Well, one of the things that Gamaliel said in Acts 5:37 was, after this man, Judas of Galilee, rose up in the days of the census and drew away some people after him. He too perished, and those who followed him were scattered. And so he's talking about this census and the resulting poll tax and the whole big controversy that blew up out of it. He's mentioning it there. But the idea here is that there was a tremendous controversy and a armed rebellion against this, and it was over a very small tax. It was a tiny fraction of the other taxes that they already paid. And so the question here is why? Why was this little tax such a big deal to the Jews? And we're going to, I think we might be able to conceptualize this a little better if we consider it in terms of the issues today. And please hear my heart as I'm asking this. I'm just trying to conceptualize things here. But ask yourself, why is wearing a face mask such a big issue to some people today? Why is getting a vaccination such a big deal to some people today? And again, along the line of thinking, some will say, and I realize that it is, but when some people ask the question, they say, we get shots all the time. This is just another shot. Why is that a big deal? Well, the answer is it's in what it represents. It's connected to things that are important to us. And for that reason, just because it's something that seems relatively small, it's connected to something really big. And for that reason, it's hard to process. And for many Jews, paying this tax, as small as it was, felt like they were outright rejecting the true and living God. For them, to pay that tax felt like they were outright rejecting the true and living God. And here's why. By paying the tax, they were by paying the tax, they were accepting and submitting to Caesar's rule over them. And in their minds, by accepting and submitting to Caesar's rule, they couldn't do so without at the same time rejecting God's rule. Do you understand what I'm saying with this? By submitting to Caesar's rule, they really couldn't do that without at the same time in their minds rejecting God's rule over them. And when the choice was framed that way, Caesar or God, it's much easier to understand why many of the Jews dug in and fought against this tax, even though it was quite small in terms of actual money. It wasn't about the money, it was about something bigger. And in the same way today, the zeal driving some of these things, like vaccinations or masks or whatever, they're driven by things that are bigger than that. And that's why it takes longer to process, and we need to take the time to work through them. People don't want to dishonor God, and it's laudable, it's understandable. And we're always going to have things like that throughout time. So the Roman poll tax sparked huge resistance at its inception, and it remained controversial in the time of our text. And with this in mind, the Jews were asking Jesus to clarify if a person was sinning against God by paying the poll tax. Are we sinning against God by paying the poll tax? Now, as we saw before, the religious leaders weren't asking this question because they cared about the answer. They were asking this question to put Jesus in a bind. And here's the problem that Jesus was facing with this question. If he said, yes, pay the tax, he would lose face with his followers by appearing undevoted to God and friendly to the Roman occupation. That would make him, again, lose face with his followers. But if he said, no, don't pay the tax, he would bring the Roman government down on himself by instigating a rebellion against the state. And so the religious leaders asked this question of Jesus, thinking that there were only two answers, yes or no, and both answers hurt him. Either they paid taxes or they didn't. Either they were against Caesar or for Caesar. They figured no matter what he said, he was going to lose, so they tried to set a trap for him. Jesus prevailed here by giving a different answer altogether. His hearers, for their part, marveled because it was a concept they'd never considered before. And his answer would go on to lay the groundwork for New Testament thinking upon the relationship of Christians and the state. So we're going to look at that now. We're going to look at the answer. Now remember, the question is, am I sinning against God by paying Caesar's tax? By paying this tax, am I sinning against God? And with the question framed this way, the only options for answering this question are negative, and this is what I mean. Either it's outright sin to pay the tax, that is to say it's intolerable by God, or God understands that you're being oppressed and he tolerates it while you patiently wait for deliverance by the Messiah. But again, the idea is either you're sinning a lot or you're not sinning so much. Either it's a terrible thing to pay this tax and you're sinning, or it's tolerable and it's not good, but God understands because you're being oppressed. Either way, there's no good option, there's no good answer. It's all negative here. And with this in mind, Jesus blows everybody's minds by saying this, basically, you obey God by paying Caesar's tax. That's what he's basically saying here. You're obeying God when you pay his tax. In other words, he's saying, not only do you not sin by paying Caesar's tax, you are actually honoring God and doing what's right by paying it. That's what he's saying there, when you peel back all the layers. And Jesus' answer diffused all the tension surrounding the question. Up to this point, people were haunted by the choice between obey God or obey Rome. But here Jesus explained that if you obey God, here Jesus explained that you obey God by obeying Rome. And now what happened is people could pay the tax and be in fellowship with God at the same time. So it was incredible. It was mind-blowing. What he was saying transcended the framework that they thought and blew their minds. And so Jesus made this argument in 4 incremental steps in the text, and we're going to look at those now, okay? So follow along with me. 4 steps that he made to making this argument. First, Jesus asked the religious leaders to produce a coin. This is the first step. Now, many people use this request by Jesus to prove that he was poor. And they argue that Jesus asked for a coin because he didn't have his own coin. Now, we have plenty of reason to believe that Jesus was indeed poor, and there is plenty of other New Testament accounts that can verify this, but that isn't the point here. This is not a good place to develop the argument for poverty. Jesus had a different reason for asking for the coin. He asked them to produce the denarius in order to reveal that they were carrying around and using Roman money. The reason that he didn't pull a coin out of his own pocket and he says, give me a denarius, was to prove that they were holding and using his money. Does that make sense? By doing it and fishing it out and coughing it up, they proved it just by doing that alone. By handing Jesus the Roman coin, they proved that they reaped the benefits of Roman currency, as well as every other benefit of security and stability that Roman rule provided. They proved that they used and benefited from the Roman system by carrying the coinage. Then, Jesus asked the religious leaders to tell them whose image was on the coin. Whose image is on it? The question is obvious, right? It's obvious. It was intended to be obvious to make an obvious point. It's Caesar's coin. And there was an implication there that was automatic. It's Caesar's coin, thus Caesar is the one providing the stability and security you live under. Does that make sense? Hand me a coin. When they handed the coin, he proved that they used the system. And then, whose face is on the coin? It's Caesar's. Caesar is the one providing those things. Automatic. They were all understanding what was happening as he did that. Then, Jesus moved to the logical explanation that it's both just and fair to give Caesar the taxes which he uses to provide these benefits for you. It's right to give Caesar what is his. It's fair to pay taxes to him so that he can use those taxes to provide these benefits for you. In other words, if you're going to argue that Caesar has no right to my taxes, then you must shun all other benefits of his reign. But if you're going to use his tax, or if you're going to use the benefits, which you clearly do, you prove that by handing the coin over, then it's only fair to pay for them through your taxes. It's fair. It's just. It's right. You're just giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. It's totally fair. It's right. It's just. Lastly, Jesus explained that Caesar's rule over their land and their taxes paid to him do not negate God's overall sovereignty. On the contrary, both you and Caesar submit to his sovereignty. Caesar does so by providing stability and security. You do by paying your taxes. And all of this falls under God's sovereignty and serves his interest. It does not conflict with God's interests. Jesus explained that in reality, it's not Caesar or God. That's the wrong way to frame that question. Caesar is not equal with God. Caesar serves God just as you do. And when you cooperate with him, you're cooperating with the whole system that God has in place. His reign over you is not negating his sovereignty. When you obey him, you're not choosing against God. You're actually cooperating with him at the same time. That's what he said there. And at the time, they'd never heard anything like that before. Up to that point, it had always been Caesar or God. Now, this brought with it implications, which the New Testament writers developed in more detail. And Paul did so in the most detail. Peter wrote about it as well. There's a few places in the New Testament, but I think probably the standard to go off of is Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. So if you wouldn't mind, let's just go ahead and turn there. Because what I want you to see here is that places like Romans 13, 1 through 7 are basically expansions of what Jesus said in our text this morning. Paul is taking it and crystallizing it and developing the full implications of it and what it means practically for us today. So, Romans 13:1, see this again as an expansion of what Jesus said in our text. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger, who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore, it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes. For rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to honor. Notice there, he's render to them what is due them. You know, there's a huge connection with the idea of rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's. The governing authorities are established by God. Respect them. Give them what is owed them, not just in taxes, but in custom and honor and everything else. And so, with all this in mind, there are three implications from Jesus' answer that we're going to apply today. And we're going to look at them very briefly. And we'll just kind of pause and think about them for a little bit. But based upon what Jesus said, with rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's, and also how Paul expanded upon it, we can see these three things. One, we owe the state our respect and goodwill. We owe the state our respect and goodwill. We should do our best to show respect to them at all times. It's not to say that we should always agree with everything that they say or not question anything. We're not saying that at all. We're just trying to say that we should show a little bit of healthy respect and deference for the position that they hold, even if we agree with them, or even if we don't agree with them. Excuse me. And I say this because what can happen is we can develop almost an antagonistic, suspicious, default negative view towards our governing authorities, to the point where they say something and we automatically default to it's stupid or it's wrong or it's a lie because of it came from the government. And I've seen that. I've been around that. And I'm not saying that you can't disagree with the government, but I'm saying that that's not necessarily a healthy place, and I'm not sure that's a scriptural place. To give them enough respect to at least consider what they're saying before you reject it as stupid or wrong or evil is all I'm saying here. Just give them enough respect and goodwill to consider the things that they say before you reject them. There's going to be times where we can't follow everything that they say, but just show them a little basic respect and things like that. Also, we owe the state our obedience and cooperation. Again, this kind of goes with the first one. But our Christianity, our faith, our understanding of the state as an extension of God and His workings in mankind means that we should, Christians, our faith should cause us to be some of the most loyal and cooperative subjects of any nation. And it's not dependent upon whether the government's perfect or not, because Rome here was not a perfect government, but Paul still said, submit to them, and so did Jesus as well. Again, when they give us things to do, we should try at least to be as cooperative as we possibly can. We're not saying we can do everything. There's going to be times we say, no, we can't do that, it's wrong. But to at least try to be cooperative and respectful, these are things that are God-honoring and things that we need to always be working on. And lastly, I think this goes without saying that we owe the state our taxes. Not fun, I know. We all pay them, it's hard. But taxes are a perfectly legit and just thing. They fund the government, and the government in turn provides our stability and safety and security. And I've heard a lot of arguments over the years about less government and how everything would be better. If we didn't have government, we would not have. There's so many things that we enjoy day to day that we just wouldn't have if they weren't there in terms of safety and stability and security. They're not perfect, and we know it. We need to labor to change it. It's totally fine to feel that way. But it's also right to pray for them and to pay our taxes and be as respectful as possible. So that's what we're seeing with this response this morning. And in conclusion, I would say and remind you that Jesus preached honor and submission to a government that was far worse than ours. The Roman government, in many ways during its time, was one of the most forward-thinking and innovative governments that ever existed. But we look back on them as well and see tyranny and oppression and all those things, and they were there. But Jesus taught to be as obedient as you possibly can and respectful. Paul expanded on that, teaching the same thing. And if that was something that they taught to a government that was dictatorial, that even persecuted Christians at times, then I believe it's something that we should be able to practice here in America, where we have so much more freedom and so much more liberty. And my prayer is that not only me, but all of us would show and reflect that proper respect for authority that we're called to. And with that said, would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we pray that you'd help us to find the right balance, because we recognize that government ultimately is made up of men, and men do foolish things and wrong things, but at the same time, these are people, men and women, that bear your authority and are serving your people. And we pray that as Christians we would find that right balance of being cooperative with them, but also nudging them towards the right so that your people and your world are served all the better. Help us to be productive and cooperative citizens, able to speak the truth, and able to stand against things, but also able to cooperate at the right times as well. We know that's a delicate balance. We know that's something that we require your Holy Spirit to guide us on, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.